guys, how's it going? So I am here for a hopefully not too long of a reading update. So this is gonna be the last books I finished for April, and then the books I'm gonna be reading in May. And normally I wouldn't do a TBR, which is why I am gonna put the wrap up and the TBR in quotation marks for the title of this video. Just because I don't tend to be good at keeping to TBRs. But I have a couple of buddy reads, as well as one book that I kind of am reading sort of on a schedule. I'll get to that. So my reading for May is almost sort of mandated in a sense, which makes it sound a lot more oppressive and authoritarian than it really is. I'm excited to be reading the books I'm going to be reading, but it does kind of make it sort of set in stone what I'm going to be reading. Not entirely, but anyway. To start with, the books that I have just finished, the last books that I finished for April. The first I finished yesterday was Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. So this was published back in 1985, and it is about, it centers on a couple of Texas Rangers so it takes place in the 1800s, and these two Texas Rangers, Augustus and McCrae and Woodrow Call, formerly in their youth, cleared out Texas of Indians, mostly, not entirely, but mostly. And but now that they're kind of old, by 1800 standards they're old, I mean they're, I think, in their 50s, they've just kind of been bumming around this town called Lonesome Dove, selling horses, and not really doing much. But one day, their old friend, Jake Spoon, kind of comes crashing in, and they haven't seen Jake Spoon in years. He was also a ranger back when they were rangers, and he gives Woodrow the idea to take cattle up to Montana and become the first rancher in Montana. And so Call just kind of takes that idea and runs with it and won't backslide on it, and so these people, this Gus, as he's called, Augustus, and Woodrow and Jake Spoon and a bunch of other people start heading up to Montana together with thousands of cattle to be the first ranchers in Montana. And there are a ton of side characters as well, and I can't really go into all of them because there's a lot of them, and the sort of relationships between everyone are very complicated, and it would just be a lot for one video. And I'm considering making a whole video about Lonesome Dove just because I liked it so much. I really loved it. I, in particular, really like Larry McMurtry's narrative style. He writes in a third-person omniscient style, so this is where you get, or well, for anyone who doesn't know, you get inside of each character's perspective. So, you know, in a given scene, if it's, you know, Gus and Woodrow, or Call as he's called, talking, you will get insight into each of their thoughts at that point. Or if there's 3 or 4 people, you'll probably get little snippets of what each one is thinking. I just really like that, because it makes every character, even if they're just a minor character, seem very human, and almost, even if they only appear for a few pages, makes them seem kind of fleshed out. Like they have a backstory and like they're a real person who could have existed, and I really love that. It's even better for the characters who you do get to know very well, because you really get a very deep psychological portrait of each of the main characters, and that's just great. And the characters themselves, as you know, characters are just wonderful. Yeah, this is a sad book. It kind of takes a very the first third or so is kind of, not classic Western style, but almost, kind of happy, you're getting introduced to the characters, and it's fun and everything, and then it starts to take a very abrupt, dark turn after the first third, and then it kind of, gets sadder and darker as it goes along, and, the ending it's a sad novel, anyway. But yeah, so Lonesome Dove, I really liked it. The next book that I just finished like 10 minutes ago is this selection of the poetry of James Merrill. I mentioned in a comment to, I think, Conrad from 7 Days at Sea that I wasn't sure yet whether I loved James Merrill's poetry or whether I just admired it. You know, because I definitely admire James Merrill's poetry. what little, he does a lot of wordplay throughout his poetry, and he makes a lot of kind of obscure, not obscure necessarily, but a lot of references to events and other literary works and other works of art and things like this that I don't always get. And what little I did get of that wordplay and those references and all that, and also just the quality of the poetry, of course, just convinces me that he is a great poet. Like, there's no question of that. However, I was struggling for a while with whether I loved the poetry, like whether I wanted to sit down and read this, whether, if I were sitting on a rainy day not quite knowing what to read, would I pick up James Merrill? Now that I have finished this, definitely I would pick up certain James Merrill poems. There are poems in here that I really loved. As in particular, one poem called Up and Down has one of my favorite quotes ever, which was, "Au fond, each summit is a cul-de-sac." That is one of the verses in that poem, and I just love that quote. It's kind of a encapsulation of philosophical pessimism, or at least that's how I interpreted it. And yeah, I loved enough of these poems that I am going to continue with James Merrill. I'm going to try to find more of his work. I know he wrote a memoir, and of course he wrote more poetry. I know of his epic poem, The Changing Light at Sandover, which is supposed to be a very strange poem, so I've heard, and it sounds strange based on what I know of it. But I want to read some of it. I also am interested in possibly reading about James Merrill. I found a kind of big biography / overview of his literary work by, I think, the same guy who edited this volume, Langdon Hammer. I might like to read that, or at least look around in it and read about the poems that I'm most interested in. Yeah, I'm definitely going to continue with James Merrill, and there are definitely some of these poems I absolutely loved, like I said. So anyway, I gave it 5 stars. I did give it 5 stars on Goodreads, so there is that. So anyway, James Merrill. I've been introduced to him, and I'm on board with James Merrill. So anyway, and the next book that I have begun and that I'm going to be reading this month, or the upcoming month of May, is Supernatural: Death, Meaning, and the Power of the Invisible World by Clay Routledge. This is actually an advanced author copy, which is why it's kind of a blah cover. But Clay Routledge, funny story. He is a professor of psychology at North Dakota State University, and when I was applying to PhD programs, I considered applying to work with him, but he wasn't taking any students, so that didn't happen. But anyway, I got this book because Steve Donahue hauled it in one of his videos, and just when I saw that it was a book by Clay Routledge, I almost squealed. The subject matter also interests me a lot. So this book is about the supernatural, as the title says, and how even people who aren't religious have an impulse to believe in the supernatural, because it fulfills certain psychological needs, supernatural phenomena that we can't explain through reference to material processes serve some kind of an existential need for humans, a need to feel that our lives are meaningful and that the universe has meaning, and things like this. And that's what this book is about. And anyway, when Steve hauled it, I almost squealed, and I emailed him, and I told him that I would love to read it, and I also told him that I would like to review it for Open Letters Review. So that's what I meant when I said I was sort of reading this on a bit of a schedule, because it's coming out June 29th. So I'm going to want to get cracking on writing before then, and I think I'm going to send it to Steve well before that time, because I've never written a book review before, so I'm going to need help with writing the book review, and it's probably going to go through several revisions, I imagine. Anyway, so that's happening, and I'm really excited about it. I'm about 50 pages in, and so far he hasn't really covered anything that I don't already know. I've actually read some of Clay Routledge's work in its original published form in academic articles, so it's kind of interesting, having read those, now coming and reading his prose in more of a popular outlet like this. But anyway, yeah, so I'll be reading that. And then the other 2 books, I have 3 books here. 2 of them are for buddy reads. So the first one is Ovid's Metamorphoses, which I guess this cover you probably can't see much, but this is the Ovid's Metamorphoses. This is the Rolfe Humphries translation. I am reading this with Elena Macredina, and yeah, this will be my second time reading it. I read it last year, and it was one of my favorite books. I absolutely loved it. I love these collections of stories like this that start with the creation of the world and kind of go on from there to a certain point in history. I think it stems from my love of the Silmarillion. And yeah, anyway, there are so many great stories in Ovid's Metamorphoses, and I'm really looking forward to experiencing them again. And I know Ovid's Metamorphoses is supposed to be very complex. You know, it has a lot of layers, clearly. You know, often, you know, the narrator will introduce this person who starts to tell a story, and then basically you'll be reading in that person's voice for many, many pages, and then maybe within that person's story, there's another person who comes along and tells a story. So there's just stories within stories in the Metamorphoses, from what I remember. I don't remember perfectly. I obviously have only read it once, so. But I'm just looking forward to experiencing these stories again, because there are so many great stories in it, so many classic myths told. Anyway, so Ovid's Metamorphoses, I'm going to be reading, and then finally, or not finally, but and then there is the Bible. So Steve Donahue announced sometime earlier this week, I believe, that he's doing a read-along of the 4 Gospels from the Bible. And I've been looking to reread the Bible at some point. I just haven't really figured out how to work it into my reading schedule, since obviously the Bible is a huge monster to tackle. And so this seemed like a good way to at least reread a very important section of it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I have the King James Bible. This is actually a King James Bible that is published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, better known as Mormons. And the reason is that, the reason I like to have the Mormon version is because before each chapter in this version, there's a little summary of what happens. And especially with something like the King James Bible, where sometimes the language is a bit challenging, that can really help to just to keep you from getting too confused. Yeah, anyway, I'm looking forward to rereading the Gospels. I love the King James Bible. It's just gorgeous language. So yeah, I'll be making videos related to the read-along, I assume. I'm not sure what Steve is calling it yet, but anyway, I assume that'll come out soon. So yeah, and then finally, I've taken to reading, so like the way I read the James Merrill collection was to read a couple of poems per day. Rather than reading, usually when I read a book, I read a certain number of pages per day. So like when I was reading Lonesome Dove, during weekdays I would read maybe 20 or 30 pages, and that would just be what I read for the day, because especially when I'm in classes, that's what I need, to just read a certain amount and be done, because, you know, I have a lot going on with school and everything. But with James Merrill, and I think with poetry in general, the better approach isn't page counts, but poems. So like with James Merrill, I would read 1 or 2 poems per day. If it were a long poem, I read 1 poem. If they were really short poems, I would read maybe 2 or 3. But just a 1 or 2 or 3 poems per day to really let me kind of sit with them and think them through better than if I were trying to get, 20 pages in or something of James Merrill's poetry. And I've kind of thought that might be the best way to read poetry, is to read 1 or 2 per day. And it's kind of sad that it took me this long to realize that, but anyway, better late than never. So I've decided that I'm going to try to read another book of poetry this month. And the book that I'm strongly leaning toward going to is The Complete English Poems of John Donne. This is my old battered copy that I ordered from thriftbooks.com. I kind of reinforced it with tapes because it was virtually falling apart, but it kind of, with nice tape all around it, kind of has a second life. And I've already read several of the poems in here, but I want to really give the entire thing a good read. And there are footnotes in the back, which I will attend to. And what I've read of John Donne I really liked. He wrote a lot of religious poems, and I tend to really like religious poems. Even though I'm not religious, I do kind of think religion explores a lot of existential themes that are important to people who aren't religious as well, and also just the beauty of the language, of course. But yeah, and John Donne is just one of those classic poets who's good to have read some of his work by, and he's just been on my mind lately. I'm not sure why. So yeah, he seems like a good one to go to this month, and so yeah. Anyway, that is what I've read in the last part of this month, and what I will be reading next month. I may read more things than that next month. I don't know. I am going to be finishing up my thesis and moving. Well, not really moving. I'm going to be moving out of this apartment and moving all of my possessions into a storage unit for the summer to keep there until I can move into my new apartment in Iowa. But I will be moving back in with my parents for the summer, so there is that. And finishing up my thesis and many other things. So anyway, that is all I have for you. So anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.